Usually, when I stand in front of a crowd of people, it's because I have some deep clarity on a topic. It's a platform for me to present something about which I have an expert opinion and profound wisdom. That is not today. Today I'm here to tell you about something I'm struggling with, something I am totally failing at. I am at the beginning of a journey, and I have some insights to offer, but I have more questions than answers. I do know that this journey is one that more of us need to be on. A few months ago, a man, we'll call him Jay, he came to me for advice. He was, by most standards, incredibly successful. His immigrant parents had worked hard and sacrificed and achieved enough so that they could send him to an Ivy League college where he studied and started a career in finance. He was younger than me and had already earned enough money so that he could take a little time off, like an adult gap year, and figure out what his next step was. So he told me this story of visiting his parents in the suburban home in which he'd grown up and listening to them recount the life they'd had before coming to this country. Their stories were full of the cacophony and warmth of human connection. There was always someone around to share a pot of tea, to listen to a complaint or a joy, to celebrate or commiserate, to tell and retell stories. He heard in their remembering an ache to belong. Not to belong like to be let into an exclusive club or to join the ranks of power, not to arrive. It was a longing to belong to and with. They had become American, not just in terms of their citizenship, but by adopting the American dream as their own. They had let go of many of their cultural practices. They rarely spoke their first language, even at home. Now they had 4th of July barbecues, and they had adopted the odd American practice of answering, "I'm good," in response to the question, "Do you need anything?" They worked late, they ate pizza for dinner, they bought a home in the suburbs, they sent their children to schools with football teams and guidance counselors. They had achieved the legendary American dream. And in doing so, they had bought into an identity that is largely defined as acquiring money and a kind of independence that left them isolated. It's not that they didn't have friends. They had dinner invitations and people with whom they sometimes went on vacation, but their insistence on self-reliance left them with a loneliness. They were missing the intimacy that comes from shared interdependence. They are not alone in being lonely. As I've traveled across the country for the last several years and talked to audiences about social capital and connectedness as mitigating forces for low-income communities, I've heard countless confessions from successful people that are lonely as hell and longing for the kind of closeness they hear me describing in communities that experience economic injustice. There's an increasing amount of research that backs up what they feel. More and more of us report being lonely and feeling disconnected. It's not surprising. We live in a culture that glorifies independence and promotes a path to success that is self-made. Accumulation of stuff and money is one of our key indicators of making it. The more we can rely on our own self-contained resources, the stronger we must be. And there is a moral righteousness embedded in this standard too. Need is a character flaw. Freedom is being unburdened and unrestrained by need, whether it's yours or others. But not having deep connection is causing us harm. We are pack animals, and we physiologically need to connect. Vivek Murthy, who is the former Surgeon General of the US, wrote in the Harvard Business Review recently that loneliness and weak social connections are associated with a reduction in lifespan similar to that caused by smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Without community, our economic security, our physical safety is weakened. It makes it harder to manage the times in our life in which we are most vulnerable: childhood, elderhood, illness. And it makes it harder to manage hardship, like losing a job, or a house, or a loved one. Not having community is bad for us. And having it is particularly good for us. Physical and emotional connection strengthens our immune systems, regulates our blood pressure, reduces stress and anxiety. And as the work of Daniel Eldridge and many others shows, it mitigates the harm of disasters like earthquakes and hurricanes. It elevates our sense of attachment and trust. It builds our self-esteem and makes us more empathetic and cooperative. The search for answers to fix our broken sense of community has many Americans looking toward the kind of sugar-borrowing, porch-sitting closeness we imagine existed in the 1950s, right? This is what Stephanie Kuntz was talking about when she talked about how we nostalgize the past. They think if we can return to this dreamiest of American dreams, that they will find the life they've been promised. Someone recently built a whole presidential campaign around this idea. But that vision is a fabrication, one. Besides that, it leaves most of us out. If you're a person of color, if you're queer, if you're poor, if you're a woman, if you have disabilities or you have family outside the context of marriage or you care about any of the people with those identities, you're not going to enjoy America being made great again. We need a new vision of American life that brings us closer to each other, that allows us to be vulnerable and imperfect, to grieve and stumble, to be held accountable and loved deeply. We need models of success that fundamentally value love, care, and generosity of resource and spirit. The good news is that there are communities out there who have been ahead of the curve when it comes to weaving the tight fabric of community and connection. It's in the queer ballroom culture in New York and DC where people create family as a response to homophobia and transphobia. It's in Detroit where a group of elders patrol their neighborhood every day with walkie-talkies to keep their community safe because law enforcement doesn't. It's in the domestic violence survivors who design creative, non-institutional strategies to keep themselves safe. It's in the community philanthropy that pays for a young person's textbooks, an elder's prescription, or a parent's cell phone bill. It is in the sharing and bartering that happens in the homeless encampments under overpasses all over Oakland, where I live. It's in the circle of Black women that gather in my home every other month to create sacred space. So I told Jay some of these stories, and I gave him what I thought at the time was really good advice. And then I spent the rest of the day distracted because I realized that I was totally full of shit. I am experiencing the same longing that he was describing. As much as I have witnessed beautiful, strong interdependence, I have yet to really pull it off myself. I'm struggling with discerning a blueprint from the glimpses I've had into beloved community. I experiment and I fail and I experiment and I get it half right. And now I am obsessed with figuring out how we find our way back home into the DNA, the home that's built in our DNA. So I try to sit and listen to the discomfort of my longing so I can hear the message that I'm sending myself. I try to quiet my heart to give it room and attention so it can recalibrate my vision, so I can see where this longing is trying to lead me. The path is still blurry, and I am committed to embarking on a year-long project to really figure out the how of this, but there are 3 things that have emerged for me. 1, we long to see and be seen. Earlier this week, I, and no doubt many of you in this room, joined thousands of people, primarily people who identify as women, in publicly sharing that we have experienced sexual harassment or assault. We posted #MeToo on social media, and some of us shared how old we were and what had happened to us. Tarana Burke began this movement a decade ago as a way of unifying sexual assault survivors. And this week was a powerful moment of public witnessing. In sharing that we too have experienced what we know is a pretty universal experience for most women, we regained some of the power that was taken from us. We lessened the stigma and shame associated with sexual assault and harassment, if only for a few days. We got to see each other. We got to be seen. And we knew that we weren't alone. We all long to be seen and accepted, to be loved, not just for our wins and our talents and the good that we do in the world, but for our hardships and our pain, for our failures and shortcomings. We want to be accepted and loved just because we are here. We all want to be enough. 2, we long to give and receive support. My wise friend, Retta Morris, wrote a couple of years ago, "It's okay to ask for help. In fact, by doing so, you are taking part in the divine circle of giving and receiving. While we often focus on what the request means for the asker, recipient, we should remember that giving can be transformative for the helper. Many of us want to be of service and make a contribution. By not asking for help when you need it, you are blocking that flow. By not asking for help when you need it, you are blocking that flow." That is one of the most liberating things I have ever read, right? We have a responsibility to each other to ask for help when we need it. Earlier this year, I spent 3 days on land that used to be a slave plantation. I was there with a group of 20 people talking about inclusive cities. On our first night, we learned that the former owner of the plantation and his 2 sons were notorious for raping and impregnating the enslaved black women on their own plantation and on the surrounding plantations. The story did, and still, makes me feel physically sick. It broke my heart. It made my skin hot. And when I heard it, I didn't want to sit with those feelings alone. So on the second day, I reached out to the 5 other black people who were there, and I asked for their help. I needed them to help me hold my feelings and to find some way to honor those women and the other enslaved people who had been on that land. So I led us out into the cold, into a field where we held hands beneath the branches of 2 trees. We lit candles, we offered prayers, we drank from a communal cup, and we poured libations. After our improvised ceremony was done, we all were just looking up at the sky and the stars, and we all realized that although the land had surely changed, that sky was the same one that the people who had worked that land had stood under, however many decades and hundreds of years ago. Now, usually when I ask for help, it is not quite so magical and moving and profound. It is much more mundane and pedestrian. But it is generally received as a gift. 3, we long for accountability. Now, accountability is often framed as taking responsibility for when you mess up, or often for me, it's about being accountable to deadlines that I set. But the kind of accountability I'm talking about is being accountable to yourself in the context of the collective. It's about recognizing that you belong to a community that exists not only now, but stretches backward and forward in time. I'm accountable to those who came before me. They survived and created so much so that I could be here. They crossed oceans. They physically labored under brutal conditions. They were separated from loved ones. They brought food and gods from their homeland to here. They invented new music and art to celebrate and mourn. They fashioned life and conjured family. They dreamed me into existence. The writer and activist Adrienne Marie Brown reminds us that we live in the ancestral imagination of others. We were dreamed by them, and we dream next. In dreaming next, I'm accountable to those who are coming after me. I must use the gifts that I have in this time to keep building the world that we want to live in. A little over a year ago, my friend Nwamaka Agbo and I started something called Black Women's Freedom Circle. It's a sacred space to bring together and support Black women in exploring what we need individually and collectively to heal from historical and lived trauma and oppression, to prioritize our own well-being, and to help us spend more time being free Black women in our daily lives. In this circle of women, I am accountable to myself and to them for my own healing and personal transformation. This kind of sacred circle making, in which the individual and the community are not existing separately from each other, is a long-standing tradition among Black women. When we do for ourselves, we do for each other. When we do for others, we do for ourselves. Even when I am away from them, I carry them with me. They are here on this stage with me right now. You all may just hear and see me, but their support, their wisdom, their experiences are carried in my voice and grounding through my bones. I may be the only Black woman scheduled to speak at PopTech this year, but I am not the only Black woman speaking. So, thank you. So in all of this, I keep coming back to the question of what it really means to be in community. What form does it take? Who does it include, and why? How far and deep must the reach of my heart extend? How can I hold in the light of generosity those who wish to do me harm? And what cost is not too much to do so? Figuring all of this out feels particularly urgent right now. So many of us in America are being targeted by hateful action and rhetoric because of who we are, how we love, where our people came from, or experiences that help define us. So many of us feel forgotten, unseen, and unheard. I know that the way to create the world we owe those who come after us is only something that can be achieved in community. And I am excited by a future in which all of us is cared for and loved so deeply that we give freely to others because we know we have enough. I also know that while I fight for that world, I fear what's coming. And the only protection against the worst is also in community. We need each other, either way and always. Thank you.